What up, Doug Gottlieb Show? Fox Sports Radio. Coming to you from the City of Angels, where Notre Dame came in Saturday night and kicked the hell out of USC. Trailed early, came back, smashed the Trojans, and advanced to the college football playoff. We do this weird thing with the college football playoff, right? We do this weird thing where we try so desperately to seek up reasons to make it about something other than the four best teams, right? Like, I've heard people say, well, if Alabama loses in the SEC championship game, they don't belong in. Why? Well, they would have lost their last game. Does anybody not believe Alabama is one of the four best teams? Is there a human being alive? Addition to that, have they performed at the level expected of one of the four best teams all season long? The answer is yes. Like, you can say, hey, they played Louisville. We didn't know Louisville would have their worst season under Bobby Petrino, their worst season since Steve Cragthorpe was there. It's fair. But we do realize they tried to play a decent non-conference game. We realize that their conference is usually a very difficult one to navigate and remain undefeated. And while the SEC East that they played, the SEC East that they played did not include Georgia, did not include Florida, and did not include Kentucky, the three best teams record-wise. Maybe that's why they have the three best records, that they didn't play Alabama. That is out of their control. They beat all the teams in the SEC West, including LSU, on their own home field. Look, you play one or two tough games at a conference. You play your conference. No one on earth doesn't believe that Alabama is one of the top four teams. So if they lose, they're still going. Because that's the only prerequisite is to all those men, and I don't know if there's any women in that room, think you're one of the four best teams. And since I'm struggling to find a human being that doesn't think they're one of the four best teams, regardless of what happens this weekend, you probably think the same as well. You may be tired of seeing Alabama, but that's not a reason to put them in. It's not a reason. Michigan's not going. I don't know if Ohio State's going if they win. But Ohio State's thrashing of Michigan is not an indictment on Michigan football. To go in and beat Ohio State at Ohio State is ridiculously difficult, especially when Ohio State has as many good players and as well coached as they are. But if you watched Ohio State this year, they survived Penn State at Penn State. They didn't survive, and they gave up 49 points to Purdue. They survived Nebraska, where you have a coaching staff that I think lost their first 7 games at Nebraska. They did beat Michigan State 26-6, but that score was not indicative of how close that game was. And then they needed a miracle, and I thought an ill-fated play calling going for 2, or just the decision to go for 2 for Maryland in overtime to win that game the week before. Then they come out and hammer Michigan 62-39. Now, in the context of what actually happened in the game, Michigan made mental errors. From some of Shane Patterson's decisions to some drops to, trying to return a kickoff and running out of bounds at your own 7-yard line. They had some injuries as well in game, which depleted them. But all in all, it was a good old-fashioned ass-whooping. But Ohio State was supposed to be this good. And when you're supposed to be this good and you only play up to your potential or your ability, heck, they trailed TCU in the third quarter, and TCU is a below-average Big 12 team. When only now you play up to your ability, my guess, if you want to say, hey, you want to play the best, you do so in the biggest games, but isn't it an indictment of how this team took so many games off, especially defensively, and showed very little effort and cohesion? That's who they were supposed to be. That's who they're supposed to be. And if they go out and they kick the hell out of Northwestern, as is expected on Fox this Saturday, they probably should go to national playoff. Why? Because they're one of the 4 best teams. Right? Find me the better option. Now, if you want to tell me, hey, Oklahoma, their defense is bad, but, is their defense as bad as Ohio State's defense was, giving up 51 to Maryland and 49 to Purdue in a loss? Probably not. And they don't have a Kyler Murray, but they got more dudes. And they each played a schedule, which, for Ohio State, everybody said, well, their schedule, they didn't play anybody. They tried to play TCU, they played them in Texas. That's supposed to be a tough game. TCU's just had a rough season. And they played Oregon State, who is bad, but at least it's a Pac-12 opponent. They played Tulane. Go look at Oklahoma's schedule. Oklahoma played UCLA. That game was scheduled a long time ago, and UCLA is in the first year of a new coaching staff. Heck, I actually think Georgia's one of the 4 best teams. They, like Ohio State, had a stinker. I would rather see Georgia play in the college football playoff, but if Georgia loses to Alabama, Ohio State wins, Oklahoma wins, Georgia will be on the outside looking in. But when I see Ohio State play that well in that situation against that well-coached team, you start to realize how they underperformed for the rest of their season. That win is actually an indictment on Ohio State, not on Michigan. Not on Michigan. And you're like, well, Jim Harbaugh was brought in to win Big Ten championships. He will. It is a process. You bring up Mac Brown, who might be it looks like he's going to be the new head coach at North Carolina. When I first got started in this business, he was head coach at Texas, and Bob Stoops had just started, and Bob Stoops won 5 in a row. They're like, oh, Mac Brown can't ever beat Oklahoma. He can't do it. He'll never do it. Oklahoma, and then they started beating Oklahoma. Like, oh, okay, well, that's that. There you go. If you can't see the improvement in Michigan football, you're just mad because you don't like Jim Harbaugh. I've heard people, well, their offense is too arcane. It's too not really. Do they run zone read? Do they run spread? Some. They still run it between the tackles. The difference is what it takes to be successful in the rest of the Big Ten and what it takes to be successful against Ohio State are 2 different things. Different caliber of athlete. There's a reason that Northwestern won the other side of the division. Northwestern is not a good football team. They're not a great football team. They're a good football team. They're not great. They're very, very well coached. Do you know they did not win a non-conference game? Let's go to the things that people don't know. Right? They don't know that hockey plays 3-on-3 in overtime. Some people still have a hard time, like I do. Astros in the American League. Wait, they're in the American League? That's right. They won the World Series. They're in the American League. That was still just odd. Hell, the Brewers in the National League is actually odd for me. Here's one. Arizona Cardinals used to be in St. Louis. And they used to have the St. Louis Cardinals in football and baseball. That's just weird. Weird to anybody else? Weird to me. Even stranger that no one seems to remember at all. But Michigan is nationally relevant. Michigan challenged for the Big Ten title. Michigan's getting closer every year. It's just really hard to beat a really talented Ohio State team in the horseshoe. And I feel like just like Northwestern winning the Big Ten West is an indictment on the Big Ten, not an affirmation of Northwestern's greatness, Ohio State beating Michigan as badly as they beat Michigan, playing as well as they played, is more an indictment on Ohio State's season than it is on Michigan's record.